In 1904, a city sewer engineer named 𝐻𝐿𝐻𝐻𝐿 was working under downtown Minneapolis when he broke through into something nobody expected, a natural cave, a real one under the block at Marquette and 4th. The city didn't announce it, according to the story. That's come down since officials kept it quiet for years because they were worried that if people found out, they'd decide downtown Minneapolis was built on a shell. Here's the thing, they weren't entirely wrong. Underneath these two cities right now, there are miles of hand-dug tunnels, an abandoned streetcar tunnel with the tracks still in it, and a 4-mile sand mine under a brand new neighborhood, a creek that hasn't seen daylight since 1912, a cave where St. Paul made 3 million pounds of blue cheese, and one concrete wall built 150 years ago that is the only reason St. Anthony Falls still exists and that nobody to this day will admit to owning. So that's what this video is, everything that's under Minneapolis and St. Paul. The mines, the caves, the buried rivers, the tunnels that are still working every day, and the ones that were sealed up and forgotten. And then the part almost nobody connects, how what's down there decided what got built up here, including what's being built right now. And before we start, hold on to that wall I mentioned, the one under the falls that nobody owns, because when I tell you what happens if it fails and what that means to the drinking water for about 1 million people in this metro, it changes how you look at the riverfront. That's coming later on in this video. Everything in this video exists because of one piece of geology. Underneath the Twin Cities, there's a layer called St. Peter's sandstone. It's 450 million years old. It's almost pure white silica, and it is astonishingly soft enough that you can dig it with hand tools. On top of it sits a hard cap of Platteville limestone. Soft rock, hard roof. That is the entire story. It means you could tunnel here with almost nothing and the ceiling would hold. So people did constantly for 150 years. Starting in the 1870s, companies started cutting tunnels through that sandstone under downtown St. Paul. Not one system, separate systems. Water mains, gas, telephone, electrical, steam heat, streetcar power cables, different companies competing with each other, digging their own parallel passages under the same streets. They crossed over and under each other. Some of them were reportedly marked underground with the name of the street overhead so crews could find their way. There was a hatch in the basement of St. Paul City Hall that meter readers used to get down into it. Geologist Greg Brick, who's the person who's actually documented most of this, puts the main water tunnels between roughly 1875 and 1890, the phone company tunnels in the 1880s, and the steam tunnels in the early 1900s. There's a multi-level maze under downtown St. Paul, and most people walking on Wabasha have no idea it's there. So this brings me to the most famous underground spot in the metro and the thing everybody gets wrong about it. The Wabasha Street Caves are not natural caves. They're mines. Starting around the 1840s, crews dug into these bluffs on the west side to pull out silica sand for making glass. Quick note before I keep going, if you own a home in the Twin Cities and you've been wondering what it's actually worth right now, there's a link in the description for a free valuation. Call me or use the link, whatever's easier. Okay, back to underground. So the mining slowed down in the 1880s and those cool caves sat empty. Cool, dark, humid, 50-some degrees all year round, which turns out to be perfect for growing mushrooms. A French immigrant named 𝐓𝐢𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻𝐻𝐻 noted growing them commercially in those caves, and it worked so well that a whole stretch of the river gorge picked up a nickname, Mushroom Valley. Restaurants started aging cheese and beer down there. Yorgie's Brewery right nearby dug about a mile of its own caves and advertised the beer as cave aged. And then it got better. In the 1930s, a University of Minnesota professor determined that the conditions in those caves matched the Roquefort caves in France. So St. Paul made a run at becoming the the blue cheese capital of North America. When the war cut off French imports, it worked. In 1941, St. Paul produced nearly 3 million pounds of blue cheese underground. Then in 1933, William and Josie Lehman opened a nightclub inside the caves called Castle Royal. Chandeliers, oriental rugs, and a gambling room in the back. Cab Calloway played there, the Dorsey brothers, Harry James. Now you've heard the gangster stories, Dillinger, Ma Barker, bullet holes in the fireplace. And I'm going to be straight with you because I'd rather you trust me than be entertained. There is no actual evidence that Dillinger or Ma Barker were even in those caves. Newspapers did report unsolved gangland shooting there, and in St. Paul absolutely was a gangster town in that era, but the specific famous names are legend, not documented history. The blue cheese is real. The mob hangout is a maybe. About 2 miles upriver, there was a cave that actually was natural, and it was the birthplace of this whole city. Fountain Cave, probably the largest natural sandstone cave in Minnesota, around 1,150 feet. A winding passage with a stream running through it, opening into a circular room about 50 feet across. The Dakota called it 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻 up a whiskey still at the entrance, and the settlement that grew around it became St. Paul. Steamboat tourists came to see it, and then the railroad started running sewage through it, and by 1880 it basically became part of the sewer system. In 1960 they built Shepherd's Road, filled it in the ravine, and sealed the entrance. The cave is still down there, you just can't get into it, and there is nothing to see on the surface but a historical marker. This is one of my favorite, and it's the one with the most direct connection to real estate in the metro. When Ford built the Twin Cities assembly plant in Highland Park in 1925, Henry Ford noticed the plant was sitting on top of a mountain of that pure white silica sand. So he built a glass plant and started mining underneath his own factory. Crews with air chisels and shovels carved out a network of tunnels roughly 100 feet down. They laid railroad tracks in them and ran little electric cars. The sand came up, went into furnaces burning over 2,600 degrees, and came out the other end as glass pulled like taffy and cut into windows for Model Ts and Model As built directly upstairs. By the time they stopped in 1959, there were more than 400 miles of tunnels between the plant site and a second site off Shepherd Road. And the tunnels kept getting used. The University of Minnesota ran seismograph station down there, monitoring the earthquakes and during the Cold War for nuclear tests. The Shepherd Road mine became a Halloween attraction called the Tunnel of Terror that ran until 2014. Here's the part that matters. The plant closed in 2011. The site is now Highland Bridge, 122 acres of new housing in one of the most desirable neighborhoods in St. Paul. People are buying homes there right now. And when Ford sold off parcels of that land decades ago, they kept the mineral rights underneath. Up on Cathedral Hill, St. Paul has an abandoned streetcar tunnel. The Selby line had a problem. The hill out of downtown is a 16% grade, and the electric streetcars couldn't climb it. They were using counterweight cable cars, and it was slow and it was dangerous, especially in the winter. So in 1906, they cut a tunnel, 2 tracks about 50 feet down at the deepest point, cost $366,000. It dropped the grade from 16% to 7%, and it opened in 1907. The last streetcar ran through it in 1953. The upper entrance at Nita Street got dug up and paved over. The lower end was sealed, though not very well. People were still getting in there into the 1980s. And here's the thing, you can go stand below the cathedral today and see the lower entrance with the original streetcar tracks coming out of a concrete wall and the 1907 iron fence still on both sides. Now here's what that tunnel did. Once the streetcars cars could actually run that line, Selby Avenue filled in. By 1930, there were close to 100 businesses on Selby between Western and Lexington, 26 on a single block by Selby and Dale. A tunnel got dug and a commercial corridor got built. Remember that. Cross the river and the story changes completely. St. Paul's underground is caves and mines, and Minneapolis's underground is water. St. Anthony Falls is why this city exists. It powered the flour mills that made Minneapolis the milling capital of the world. But the water didn't just hit a wheel next to the river. The mill owners built an underground system, head race tunnels carrying water in, turbines under the buildings, tail race tunnels sending it back out the Mississippi. The power system that built Minneapolis was hidden under the streets. In September of 1868, two men, William Eastman and John Merriman, started digging a tunnel under the river from Nicollet Island beneath Hennepin Island to power the mill. It was about 6 feet square. They dug through the soft sandstone for a solid year without a problem. Then on the morning of October 4th, 1869, the crew came back and found water seeping in. They figured it was a small fix and kept working. By noon, the seep was a flow and they were out of the tunnel with their tools and they never went back in. The next day, October 5th, the river broke through the limestone. What happened next is one of the strangest scenes in the city's history. A whirlpool opened up in the middle of the Mississippi. The river started tearing out the sandstone underneath the falls from below, and downtown Minneapolis emptied out to watch. One witness described store owners leaving their shops, bakers leaving their ovens, barbers walking away from customers mid-haircut, lawyers walking out of court, everyone running for the river. The Summit Mill was destroyed, chunks of Hennepin Island washed away, and there was a real serious chance that St. Anthony Falls was about to stop being a waterfall and become a set of rapids, which would have ended the entire reason Minneapolis existed. Hundreds of volunteers threw logs and rocks and dirt at it. They built 3 coffer dams and it held barely until the river froze. Then in 1870, spring floods came through and wrecked a lot of that work. So Congress appropriated $50,000 and the Army Corps of Engineers came in. Here's what they built. They sank a shaft 75 feet down through the limestone on Hennepin Island. They quarried stone off Nicollet Island for concrete, and working in 8-hour shifts around the clock, they built a concrete wall underneath the riverbed running from one side of the river to the other. 1,850 feet long, 40 feet deep, 6 feet thick at the base, finished in November of 1876. That wall is why St. Anthony Falls still exists. It cuts off the water that would otherwise keep eating the sandstone out from under the limestone. The rock you look at today are a concrete apron sitting on top of a 150-year-old repair. And here's the part I told you to wait for. Nobody will say who owns that wall. Not the Army Corps, which built it, not the city. Nobody has taken responsibility for it. It isn't clear when it was last inspected or maintained, or whether it's been inspected at all in living memory. Within a year of it being built, the river was already breaching small sections, and geologists who looked at it say the water may still be working its way over, under, and through it. If that wall fails, the falls collapse. And if the falls collapse, the water level upstream drops below the intake that supplies drinking water to Minneapolis and St. Paul and several suburbs. Roughly 1 million people, plus hospitals, schools, fire hydrants, potentially inside a few days. There is a wall under the Mississippi River holding up the reason this city was founded, and it's an orphan. Basset Creek starts at Medicine Lake and runs 12 miles east. It used to run right through what's now downtown Minneapolis, above ground. Starting in 1908, the city put it in a tunnel, and by 1912, the stretch through the warehouse district was gone, buried in places about 80 feet down. There's a creek flowing under the North Loop right now. That's water moving under Target Field on a game day day, and nobody in the stadium knows it. And here's the real estate consequence, which is not a small one. The summer field housing project was built on top of that creek's old floodplain. Poor soils, it gave those building foundation problems and flooded basements for decades. Even today, new construction near that tunnel alignment can require special foundations and deep pilings. The creek didn't leave. It just stopped being visible, and it kept sending the bill. And this isn't all history. Some of the biggest tunnels down there are new. Minneapolis has about 3.9 miles of deep stormwater tunnels under downtown, 70 to 80 feet below the street, cut into the same sandstone. They collect the runoff for nearly all of downtown, and they've gotten so overloaded that the system would pressurize. The city's own documents list flying manhole covers as a hazard. So between 2001 and 2024, they bored a new parallel tunnel 12 feet across and about 4,200 feet long under Washington and Chicago avenues. Over 70,000 tons of sandstone and shale came out. The new tunnel holds 3 times what the old one did, roughly 4 million gallons. Under the airport, the blue line runs through twin terminals beneath Terminal 1 and under active runways. They built an underground station while the airport kept operating overhead. And in the Kenworth corridor between Cedar Lake and Lake of the Isles, there's a brand new half-mile light rail tunnel. It's the reason the Green Line extension is opening in 2027 instead of 2023, and a big part of why the project ran into $2.86 billion. The soil down there was wet and rocky and much worse than anyone expected, and they were building next to a condo building. The tunnel exists because of a fight over where to put the trains, and it's about to do that corridor exactly what the Selby tunnel did to Selby Avenue, which is the thing I actually wanted to show you. Every one of these is the same story. Somebody found soft rock and dug, and every time what happened underground decided what got built on top of it. Ford dug a mine, and 100 years later, there's a neighborhood called Highland Bridge on it. The city buried a creek, and North Loop developers are still paying for pilings because of it. A transit company tunnel under Selby Hill and 100 storm fronts appears. The Army Corps poured a wall under the river, and there's still a waterfall and a milling district and a riverfront above it. That's not history. That's happening right now in Kenilworth, in Highland Park, along the North Loop. The ground under this metro has been deciding property values for 150 years, and it hasn't stopped. And none of it was by accident of luck. It's one layer of 450 million year old sandstone with a hard cap on it, sitting under 2 cities that happen to get built on top of it. Buildings come down, neighborhoods change, the rock doesn't move. If you own a home anywhere in the Twin Cities and you want to know what it's actually worth in today's market, not the Zillow guess, the link in the description gets you a free valuation. Call me or book online, whichever is easier, and I'll put together a PDF you can sit down and go through with your spouse, free, no obligation. And if you like this kind of thing, the next one I'm working on is the Twin Cities buildings that were demolished, the ones this city tore down and immediately regretted, starting with the Metropolitan building. I'll put a link when it's up. I'm Arne Johansson. Thanks for watching, and the next time you're walking down Wabasha or standing at the falls, there's a lot more under you than you think.